So you mentioned Checketts, and the book opens with a story that I think this is Berman did a write up on that particular story in the Post like a month or so ago, right? If I'm not mistaken, or maybe it was something else that he wrote about in his article. But I didn't realize this. Ewing was like gone. He was almost gone in 1991. Had you heard that before you did that research?
No,
because I had it, and I feel like I knew a lot.
Yeah, I was young. Well, I'm older than you are. I guess I was 14 then. I knew he was unhappy. I knew that there was talk that maybe he wanted out, this and that. It wasn't like today too. It wasn't there was no Twitter, there were no Woj bombs. It wasn't all over the place. So there wasn't as much information, but I knew he was not happy at one point, but I didn't know that that he went to such lengths to try and get out of there. And it's really interesting too, in retrospect, because if it was 2020, like if it was now, well, he would have been gone.
That's right? That's the thing. I was, rereading it today, and I couldn't help but think of the James Harden situation. I'm like, oh my goodness, this sounds awfully similar. And I don't want to spoil the whole story, but like you tell an anecdote about how they offered him a contract that would have made him the highest paid player in team sports, and he said no. He said, I don't want it. I want to go elsewhere. Yeah. Like when you found that out, what was your reaction?
Wow. Wow. I thought it was really cool, interesting that when Checketts told me, I asked him about it. He's like, yeah, I explored trading him a little bit. He's like, I flew down to San Antonio and I offered Red McCombs, the owner of the Spurs, Ewing, and $10 million for David Robinson. And I was like, you did what? Like what? How is that not huge news? Did that never come out? Like I $10 million too in 1991 for a small market team was actually a lot of money.
Well, I'm trying to think the salary cap back then. I'm off the top of my head. It had to be in like the 30s or maybe even the 20s or low 40s,
something like that. But this way, no player was making $10 million a year.
Oh no.
So you think of that now, extrapolate that now. Maybe that's the equivalent of like $50 million now or something like that. Maybe even more. I don't know.
I mean, they have rules against it now, but yeah, it would be a lot of money.
Well, and that's the crazy thing too. It's crazy that such a trade was discussed, but it's crazy too that back then that you could do that. That you could just say that, James Dolan theoretically could just say, yeah, well, here's $100 million. Give me James Harden. It's like, that's crazy.
Yeah. The other thing that's crazy about that story that you open the book with is that, so I'm 37, I'm a few years younger than you. And I find that not only myself, but even people older than me and most just people who are fans of the team, they look back at that era as like there was no bad. There was no impending doom. The impending doom was, Charles Smith missing a layup and other things that you wrote about. But it doesn't feel like it was ever something that was on the rocks. It feels like, okay, Ewing got drafted. Maybe we missed the boat with, pairing him with Bernard King. But other than that, it was essentially your normal, earn your place in the league, slow and steady, upward rise. And I'm reading what you wrote. And I'm like, man, he was here for over a half a decade and it wasn't happening. And it's like, wow, I guess it was a lot more frustrating than we realized.
Yeah, you're right. And he back then he did his 4 years in college, so he was approaching 30, and he wasn't that young anymore. Yeah. And I think of it. I try to think of it in terms of today's team. That you can go. It was such instability his first 6 years. There's a line in there that
which people forget. I think people look at those again as the glory days as an opposite of what's going on now, because now we look at the Knicks, it's like it's instability, hopefully not under Leon Rose, but there's not that image of back then. And as you wrote, that was not the case.
Right. Yeah. And it, Checketts said when he first talked to Patrick, it was like talking to an orphan who had already lived in several different foster homes. That was the analogy he used. He'd gone through I think it was 6 years. He had gone through 5 coaches, 3 general managers, 3 presidents. So it's very relatable now. You can take, if you get the right people in there, obviously that's the dream, is that Leon Rose is the next Dave Checketts, and he comes in and he brings some real stability and structure to the organization. And if you do that from the top, you can turn things around.
Well, so far so good. Early returns are positive. I'd like to think.